Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies, where we explore all things cinema. I want to welcome back to the show Jonathan Rosenbaum, the writer and film critic, and we're discussing his recent book, In Dreams Begin Responsibilities. Jonathan, welcome. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks. Actually, is that what we're just? I thought we already did. And dreams begin responsibilities.
No, that
Actually,
I hope not.
yeah.
We
No.
did
Okay. Well,
cinema.
okay. I get a little.
Yeah, the one.
I guess I'm a little confused.
We a couple of years ago we discussed your previous book, Cinema and was it Cinema Encounters, I believe?
That's right. Cinematic encounters.
Cinema.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, it's just a question of keeping track. So anyway, yeah, sure.
Well, you do
All
have
set.
three books coming out, so I can understand why it's difficult to pin down which one we're discussing. But we'll
Yeah.
we'll touch
Okay.
on the other
Sure.
two. We'll touch on the other two eventually.
Well,
But
the one we're discussing actually is one of my most ambitious books. So
right.
yeah, I'm happy that we're doing it.
Well, I love the title, In Dreams Begin Responsibilities. What made you want to call it that?
Well, it actually comes originally from is cited by William Butler Yeats uh, at the beginning of a book that that came out in the early part of the 20th century. I can't remember the exact date, but anyway, it's a kind of it's a slogan. Of course, it was picked up by Delmore Schwartz as the title of this wonderful short story of his with that title. But I actually like to think that. I don't know that I think that there's a moral aspect, to sort of like being a film critic, and there's also a certain freedom. So it seems to me that the dream, the dreams part is about the freedom, and the responsibility is about the moral aspect.
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny because when I first heard the title, I thought I mean I sort of interpreted it as one in the something, particularly if you're a writer or something in film or the arts, is that if that's what you're going to do, if that's your dream, then the responsibility is to make it explore life or have some kind of insight into people, and there's a real responsibility that goes with. That was just the first thing I thought of
Well,
when.
I guess what it is that it goes against the idea of cinema's escapism because it
Right.
seems to me that what's happening right now in this country, as I say at the end of actually another book of mine, Travels in the Cities of Cinema, politics is has become the newest form of escapism, actually,
Yeah,
a
unfortunately.
new form of fantasy, and anyway.
Well, and talking about the cover and the back, so you have Playtime and 2001: A Space Odyssey for the cover, and then on the back
Yes.
you have Charlie Parker and Coleman Hawkins, and a still from Ivan the Terrible Part One. So why these three films and those musicians?
Well, I wasn't thinking. I was thinking on the front cover, particularly of the films, but I actually think the idea. See, I wanted to convey the essence of the book in some way. And part of the essence of the book is all right, is it's not just about film, it's also about literature and music. And I thought, how do I convey the idea of literature? And the way the literature, it's very indirect, is that I hit upon the idea of rhyming images. In other words, images that rhyme with each other. And of course, the whole idea of rhyme is a literary idea. So there's that. And of course there's a lot of the music aspect is mainly about jazz, but I also thought that there was something very interesting, not just in the way that the compositions rhyme with each other, but also I wanted to make it a kind of game with the reader in which the reader is invited to be imaginative. In other words, there are different meanings for the back cover, which in a way is more complicated than the front cover, the front cover, because, you know, is Ivan the dream or the responsibility? Is the crowd and similarly with Charlie Parker and Coleman Hawkins, there are different ways you could read it. And I actually think that I'm very much a believer in sort of like writing being a kind of social art, and that there's a kind of way in which I depend on the creativity of the reader. It's not just simply about me being creative and the reader being a receptor. I think it was more as a kind of creative collaboration.
Mm. Is that where the because I find it fascinating that jazz and literature has influenced the way you write so much. I mean, was has that always been a conscious style for you, or is that just organic because of the way in which you're so passionate about it, about each
Well,
medium?
it developed, and I think in a way, putting together this book was a way of recognizing something I've been doing my whole life, but not being aware of it, and in a kind of interactive way. Because, in other words, one thing that was a great revelation to me while putting together this book was seeing to what extent, literature, music, and film have a presence in my writing from the very beginning up to up until now. And I guess I didn't realize to what extent, even from my earliest childhood, I was very much plugged into these three art forms and was thinking about them in relationship to each other. So,
Mm.
so in a sense, it was like, that was something that in a way was exciting to me to discover that this had been a theme that I've been carrying around in my work without realizing it. You know,
Right.
uh, yeah.
Well, the I mean, it's interesting to me because I was trying to think how do the three connect, and I was just curious what is for you, what is the connection between literature, jazz, and
Well, there
movies?
are different connections in different ways, and of course, different pieces in the book sort of like touch on some of the meeting points. I mean, there's the element of improvisation relative to jazz. Uh, there's the idea, which I think in certain cultures treat film as literature by another means. And that's certainly something that you can find in French culture, in Hungary, from the very, Hungary was a place where film was considered an art form even before in France. But it's kind of linked to literature there, but also in cultures such as Russia and Iran, where poetry is so important.
Hmm.
There's a certain kind of way in which every art form kind of refers back to that in those cultures to a certain extent. So that people who are illiterate in Iran, some of them have memorized long poems, and can recite them, and it's sort of like it's poetry is so powerful in Iran that it's really in competition with Islam, actually.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think it's part of everybody's culture. And of course, this is something that tends to be ignored well, not so much ignored as people don't even know about it to a large extent in the West. They
Right.
think of everybody as Islamic, but they don't realize that very large portion of the population of Iran is very young and not especially religious. It's a culture it's a country that's ruled by um, as in this country, by a minority, actually.
Hmm. Um, the the way I like how even sometimes you place yourself in the writing, like for in the pieces. For example, the
Yes.
Dr. Strangelove, you talk about the experience of the you're going with your friend and how she came out crying. And so you sort of
Yes.
investigated why that might be. Um, I is with I mean, not that we have to put a label on it, but is there, because I've as myself when I've written certain reviews, if I've done that, sometimes the notes I'll get is, well, this isn't a review. And I'm like, well, why, so sometimes I'm like, what, are people too
Well, it
up
seems to
on
me
like,
that being autobiographical is a form of honesty,
right.
because it seems to me that the whole idea that any criticism can be objective is a total myth and is absurd.
Yeah,
How could we? And in fact, it doesn't even make any sense, because why should we assume that a film can be, or any work of art can be good or bad, without saying good or bad for whom, good or bad for what? I
right,
mean, it's like if you leave out the last part, it becomes meaningless, because it's entirely possible that a film could be great for you and not great for me, and we both have good reasons. So why does we have to assume that there's also one size fits all? It's kind of a ridiculous
mm,
requirement on the reader to conform to, sort of like everybody else in the world, and say everybody has to say this is a good film and everybody has to say this is a bad film. It's absurd.
right, right,
Uh, so being autobiographical is a way of being honest and saying this is where my ideas are coming from, and this is why I think such and such.
mm. Yeah, no,
So I hit upon that when I wrote Moving Places, which was, you know, from very early on, I sort of saw myself as a literary writer. I mean, I was writing fiction and poetry long before I was writing film criticism. And so I really like to, and that's still part of me. I mean, one way it sort of changed is in Dreams Begin Responsibilities is the first time I own up to not only own up to, but describe myself as an artist, which a lot of people will consider this, maybe pretentious and ridiculous. But in fact, it's been part of my presumption from the very beginning in terms of the way I see myself as a writer, and my attitude towards writing. That it's so in a way, when I get into problems with publishers and publicists and whatever, it partly has to do with the fact that I see myself, in terms of one way, and then in fact the market sees another. And I think it's significant that In Dreams Begin Responsibilities was actually rejected by two academic presses, even though the editors I submitted them to liked the book and wanted to do it. They were vetoed in both cases by their publicists. And to me, the fact that publicists have more power at academic presses than the editors is outrageous.
mm,
I mean, it's sort of like if that really is the case with all academic presses, then it seems to me that they shouldn't even qualify for grants. If it's just about making money, then why do we assume that the academic press is more serious than other kinds of presses? It's not. It's just as much, it's just as much lowering itself to just thinking about making money. So it just becomes, so in other words, I feel like I've been a victim of what I call capitalist censorship. Uh,
mm.
and this was including with a press that I published most of my early books. I mean, University of California Press, they were the first ones where this happened, where the publicist rejected the book, and then Columbia University Press, even though again, the editor I showed it to wanted to do the book. So it just seems to me that we talk about America being free. We kind of leave out capitalist censorship, which, you know, dictates a lot of what we do in our lives. Actually, it's not just like a simple, catchphrase. It's a real fact in our lives that we don't often acknowledge.
Do you think it was getting turned down by some of these publications because they only want it to be strictly film, and because this was
I,
more,
I think it has to do with that. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm sure they didn't tell me this, but I assume it has to do with cross marketing. You see, because ever since Ronald Reagan was president, is the whole idea of Reagan economics is that you take a market that already exists and you exhaust it and you exploit it, but you don't create new markets. So it's a very reactionary position.
Mm,
It's basically saying university presses are not in the business of creating new markets. They're in the business of exhausting old markets. Um, and because this isn't an old market book, they don't want to do it.
hmm. Well, luckily
And,
someone did.
and in a way, it's very insulting to the public, it seems to me. It's saying to people in the public that, you're too stupid. You wouldn't understand a book that's about both jazz and literature and film.
Right, right, right. Hmm. Well, luckily the you found someone who the company that did it.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful publisher based on the West Coast, although the publisher himself used to live in Chicago and used to put out a magazine that I wrote for called Stop Smiling. A magazine, by the way, of the arts, not just a film magazine, but a magazine that also dealt at various times with jazz and also with literature
Hmm.
and with painting and with all the different arts.
And then is that no longer a magazine? Is it still in publication?
No, the magazine doesn't come out anymore, but it and I miss it because it was a great magazine. But I think that they do a lot of interesting books. I mean, they published a book on Manny Farber, my favorite American film critic, which was put more emphasis on his paintings than on his film criticism, actually. And they're going to be bringing out next year a two-volume work, which is the book version of Tom Anderson's Los Angeles Plays Itself. He's been working for years and years on a huge book
Oh, wow.
with the same title and subject. And so they're going to be publishing that next year.
Oh,
And
well,
they've done a lot of other interesting things, including, like a biography of Ray Bradbury, for example. They have
I-
I think they're very, and part of the advantage of it being a small independent publisher is that you get a lot more personal attention. You're not on some kind of factory conveyor belt, which you are when you're, at bigger presses.
hmm. Hmm. The jumping into some of the pieces you write about, I wanted to ask a little about Pasolini because you said that you initially didn't think he was as important as the likes of Fellini, Antonioni, Rossellini, or Visconti. I was curious why that was initially.
Well, I mean, after all, his position was kind of scandalous that he was his all of his work is about Catholicism, and it's also about, him being gay, and also he's generally considered in Italy the greatest Italian poet of the 20th century. So, it's sort of like all these things in combination. So in some ways, you could say that I'm as susceptible as the people I'm criticizing to sort of seeing them in simplified ways. So I saw Pasolini originally the way I would see other filmmakers, just as filmmakers and not in relationship, seeing what he was doing, having a relationship to literature and to other issues. And they're they're challenging films, in a certain way too.
Hmm.
So I think that's why. I mean, it just seems to me. Of course, I don't read Italian, so I don't know that. But I mean, I've read the novel and translation of Teorema, which is one of my favorite films of his, and it's a film that's not, you know, a lot of Westerners have trouble with it. I mean, the first time I saw the film was at a press show in New York, where everybody around me was howling with laughter all the way through. It's like it made them so embarrassed
Oh,
that they could only respond by treating it all as a farce, which of course is what made I mean, I can remember how hysterical Rex Reed was, laughing all the way through. And it was, I was very annoyed. I just thought, you know, uh, these people don't get it. This is a serious movie. Why can't we take it as a serious movie?
I wonder
You know?
why they react in. in such a
Well,
way.
because it embarrassed them.
Yeah, because
At
the
least put
images
them on the
are kind of
spot, you know. It's
more like paintings, I
and
guess.
you see, I think artists that do that sometimes are valuable because they do that.
Mm,
They make us aware of our own limitations
true.
and
Yeah.
our own contradictions and so on.
Mm. You also mentioned because you're talking about Mama Roma, his one of his films, and you mentioned that Anna Magnani, the star, as an auteur, and I was curious what if you can talk a little bit about how she is one.
Well, because first of all, I think Pasolini even suggested that he wouldn't have wanted to make the film if it wasn't for her. So, in other words, it has an awful lot to do with her energy, her gusto, her emotional density, you could almost say. There are just a lot of qualities she has that are as important as artistic values as what Pasolini is bringing to the project. And in a way, you could see the film as you know, it's not even controversial to say that the film is a collaboration between Pasolini and Magnani.
Right. Right. Yeah, I love her in it. I mean, just some of the reactions she has, like at the end, this when her son dies, and just the look of absolute grief and shock. I'm like, how did she, that's not easy to do in just one shot. I
Yeah.
don't know. She was such an incredible actor. I've always loved Ozu, but I must admit I hadn't seen any of his silent films, and you inspired me to watch some of them. And you talked about how his silent films are less talked about than his sound films. Do you have any idea as to why they've sort of been overlooked to an extent?
Well, I mean, I think silent films are tend to be overlooked by younger people. I was very shocked. The first time I've been to Japan twice in consecutive years. I mean, it was like at the end of it was, I think like 1999, I think was when I went the first time. And I was invited to be on an Ozu panel. And the best critic in the world on Ozu is Hiko Hasumi, who to me is the greatest film critic who's alive now. I mean, he's amazing.
Oh,
And at the time, he organized this panel on Ozu. He was the president of Tokyo University, which is kind of amazing. I mean, an elected position. So, in other words, the students and everything elected him to be as president.
oh wow.
I was shocked when I spent a lot of time talking to his graduate students that not one of them had seen any silent Ozu film. And I just thought, this is crazy, particularly because all the surviving silent films are available in Japan on DVD.
Yeah.
Or yeah, or back then it was video before DVD. So it just seemed to me that there was and also there are all these cliches, which actually one thing that's great about Hasumi is that he basically destroys those cliche ideas about him. I mean, even the idea that he's the most Japanese of Japanese filmmakers, when Hasumi argues he's the least Japanese because the weather in Ozu's films is the weather of Southern California, not the weather of Japan.
Oh God. Oh, I didn't even know that. It didn't even dawn on me.
Uh, no, well, he was a fanatic fan of Hollywood, and for him, and in fact, the fact that you see even film posters for Hollywood films and in most of his films actually,
Mm.
and they often have a relationship, even stylistically or thematic, with what the films are about. Like even a late film, for example, like one of his better known films, Ohio or Good Morning.
Yeah.
You see a poster of oh God, what is it? The film with Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis.
Oh, the
The
Defiant one?
Defiant,
Yeah.
the Defiant Ones, yeah. And the point is that's about people being chained together. And Ozu's film is about suburbia, and in a way it's about people being chained together by living in close quarters next to each other and so on. So in other words, it's not just a flip thing. It actually is almost like a clue to what the film is about, the movie poster in that case.
Ah, right.
And I actually think, I mean, my favorite of all of Ozu's films is I Was Born But, which is one of the late silent films.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's just sort of like the limitation of, you know, Western culture of just not being able to see beyond the obvious, you know?
Mm.
And it just seemed to me that all this stuff about Ozu not having camera movements, not doing this, not doing that, is all based on ignoring the silent films. And there are actually more of his silent films that we have today than we have sound films. He made more silent films than he made sound films. So it's like it's not even paying attention to Ozu to ignore all of his silent films. I mean, it's an important part of who he was, more important than the silent films I think of John Ford or Howard Hawks, for example, because there are more of them and he made more major films, I think, that were silent.
And you see the camera certainly moving more in his silent as opposed to his.
Quite a lot. And
Yeah.
I even talk about, you know, so I do think to me, very important to, if you're interested in Ozu, to be aware of his silent work.
Right. Hmm. The another filmmaker that I had heard of, but I hadn't seen many of his films was Frank Teshlin, which you write about, and I loved "Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter," which you described as his masterpiece, and I think a lot of you, as you say, a lot of people pay attention more to "The Girl Can't Help It," which I also really liked. But I'd have to agree. I thought this was a better film, and I was just curious why that's his best film in your view.
Well, it's funny. It's the first time in my life I liked a film so much I sort of stayed in my seat and watched it two times in a
Yeah.
row, you know, at the theater. I think it's because well, it's really funny. It was made the same year as Chaplin's A King in New York.
Right.
And it seems to me that there are very interesting parallels between the two. That it's almost like I mean, just a satire. What's kind of there's an incredible moment in Well Successful Rock Hunter in which the Tony Randall character, in order to find out what's going on with his niece, which is right outside his window, he has to turn on the TV because it's an easier way to find out than
Mm.
and you know, and a lot of people attacked Tashlin when it came out. Andrew Sarris attacked. He said it's one thing to be a comment on vulgarity, but Tashlin is simply vulgar. And it somehow he thought it was simply vulgar to show Betsy Drake doing these exercises to enlarge her breasts, you know. And I thought, why is that why is that vulgar? I mean, it seems to me that he's commenting on something that's
Yeah.
vulgar, but it you know, the funny thing about that I love about Tashlin is that he's a very incisive satirist, and yet there are never any villains in his films. No villains at all. Everybody's a good guy in some way.
Yeah.
Everybody is pathetic.
Mm.
And so he's the opposite of someone like Jonathan Swift. I mean, he actually is a humanist. And also it's kind of interesting that and the one person who's a real disciple of him in this respect is Joe Dante.
Right.
I find the same qualities. And of course, Joe Dante even acknowledges it. He's a big Frank Tashlin fan
Mm.
and as an influence.
Right. Yeah, I could certainly see it, the connection, and he's so I mean he was so of the time, but ahead of its time now when we think of how media drenched we are with phones and I
Yeah,
thought
and also Tashlin made a real impact on the French New Wave, especially Godard. But
right,
I mean, I think you can see the way Godard took over the use of colors and making it, you know, films like comic books in a way.
right,
But I think there's so Bertolucci and Partner is very, it seems to me, shows a lot of Tashlin's influence also.
right, right. And just that whole thing of being so money obsessed, even though that guy wanted to be a farmer. So,
Yeah.
but it's all in his mind. Well, that's not good enough. I've got to go after more and more money. I thought, wow, so that's so on the nose then and probably more now. It's
Yeah,
yeah.
no, and the funny thing is that, he has a bad rep for no good reason. Like there's a film of Skolimowski that I rather like called King, Queen, Knave, which is an adaptation of a Nabokov novel. And when that film premiered at Cannes, it was around the same time that Tashlin had just died. And so at Skolimowski's press conference, I asked him about Tashlin, and his response was, "I haven't seen any films by him, but but from what I know about him, I'm insulted by your
Oh,
sort of comparing my work to his, which is just it's so stupid and crazy. I mean, it's sort of like, in other words, things that people praise Andy Warhol for, they attack Frank Tashlin for, because Andy Warhol was in the art world and Tashlin was in the movie world.
right.
And that just again shows you how provincial criticism often tends to be when it makes those when it sort of uncritically takes over those biases.
Mm,
Because it seems to me that well, I don't know, it just seems to me that uh and it also of course relates to the total denial with which Americans view Jerry Lewis, particularly deny, and the real denial in their case is the fact that Jerry Lewis was much bigger in the United States than he ever could have been in France. So when they say the French love Jerry Lewis, what about the Americans really love Jerry Lewis? How come he made 3 films a year when he was with Dean Martin? Because of the American audience, not because of the French audience. I mean, it was like, so it's like Americans just revealed their own provinciality and stupidity when they sort of like say, and in fact, even saying that the French love him, that's half a century out of date now. It's been almost half a century since he was, like a big topic. Woody Allen is much more popular in France than Jerry Lewis, for
mm.
example. It just shows that Americans don't know anything about French culture. I mean, basically.
Is that also just because people don't like to think of movies as art? They like that they just think it's something to consume and that's it.
Well, it's partly that. In the case of Jerry Lewis, it's also involves, their embarrassment about their adolescence, the
Ah,
fact that Jerry Lewis represents America for most of the people in the world, that they like Jerry Lewis because they see him as an embodiment of America at its best and its silliest. So that's embarrassing to
I
people.
see. Yeah.
So I think there's a whole lot of unconscious reasons why I think people are so eager to reject Jerry Lewis now in this country.
Hmm. The another film I saw, which and I haven't read the book, but was Cronenberg's Naked Lunch, which I quite liked.
Yes.
I couldn't help but wonder, the Burroughs, he's clearly the main character is based on Burroughs, and he talks about writing as being something dangerous, and I wonder if that do you think a big part of that is him confronting the fact that he was gay in that story, and that he couldn't handle
Well,
it?
yeah, in other words, it's about his self-hatred,
Right,
but it's really, and in a way, I mean, I think that Naked Lunch is a very great book, but at the same time, I don't consider the film. I think the film I really like, but I don't see it's not it's almost like a riff or an improvisation based on themes from Naked Lunch, but it's not really an adaptation of the book because you don't really get it's not spelled out in that way that
right.
it's you know that it's Burroughs hating himself and critiquing himself and all of that. I don't think that that's what you get from the book, but
I
it's certainly there in the film.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'll have to read the book. I have it. I just haven't got into it yet.
Well, it's quite an avant-garde book
Right.
because it's a kind of a book that it's in which discontinuity is, you know, there's much more continuity in the film than there is in the book in a
Mm.
certain way.
Hmm. Another chapter you have is about Johnny Guitar with Joan Crawford, which is a film
Yeah.
I quite like. And I've interviewed a couple of authors in the last year who had Crawford books recently released, and I realized I hadn't seen as many films with her as I thought. And I saw a lot of them, and I really think she was a great actor. And I was just curious if there are other films of hers you really like.
Well, many. There was a great, in my first book, Moving Places of Life at the Movies, I quote a person who was a friend of mine when I lived in Paris named Marilyn Golden. She was a writer who actually worked on scripts, actually collaborated on with Bertolucci and other filmmakers. And she at one point said, it's more important to Joan Crawford that you admit that she's great than it is to you to deny it or to refute it. In other words, it's like that will to power, which
Right,
is very becomes very subversive in a way. And actually, I like Mommy Dearest because I think it really deals with that aspect of her.
right.
That she was sort of like she was into power, and maybe a reprehensible human being and a bad mother or whatever. But the point is that she was a phenomenon,
Yeah.
and also not with even though that she definitely had talent of a kind.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Are there any other films of hers you quite like in addition to Johnny Guitar?
Oh, I'm sure there are, but I mean, in terms of spelling them out, and I can't. I don't know if there's any that I like as much as Johnny Guitar, but there's certainly ones that plenty of melodramas that she was in that were quite strong.
Yeah. The last question I had was about Vagabond, Varda's Vagabond, because you wrote about how I really like this about how her frames ask questions. And is that because she doesn't give any easy answers in her movies?
Well, I think it's partly that. I think that yeah, she's curious about, and in ways making films as a way of extending and applying her curiosity to the world around her. So I think one of the things that makes Vagabond a great film, and for me, her Agnes Varda's greatest film, is that it's so open-ended and open-minded about its subject. It's not trying to sort of like it's basically trying to play against all the cliches that come to our minds when we start to think about homeless people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because at a certain point I was because it was actually the first time I'd seen it. Then I thought, well, I wonder why she's homeless, and then you get all kinds of she doesn't tell you, right? Which I like because it's ambiguous, and it almost seemed like she was a lost soul in a lot of ways, and looking for some kind of meaning that she couldn't function in the world, but now she couldn't function outside of the way the world is structured, which is the
I was very lucky that I don't remember if I mentioned this in the piece on Vagabond, but um, I was able to see a play written by and directed by John Cassavetes shortly
yeah,
before he died, A Woman of
yeah,
Mystery.
you did, yeah,
Yeah, where Jenna Rollins plays a bag lady
right,
and is out and for what was so interesting to Cassavetes is that for him, being homeless meant being without definition.
yeah,
And in fact that was a kind of like which makes which challenges, of course, people like us. I mean, who basically having how we kind of come to terms with homeless people has to do with how we come to terms with people without definition.
mm,
So I thought it was, yeah, that she was that it's a very important film in a way.
mm. Yeah. I've always really liked her movies, so I was glad I finally saw it, and I'm sure I'll see it again. So again, the book is called In Dreams Begin Responsibilities. If people want to get it, Jonathan, where would you suggest they go?
If you go to Hat and Beard Press, which has a website, easily accessible, uh, I get more money from it that way than if they buy it on Amazon.
Yeah.
And they get more money too. Amazon takes a big chunk of it, you
Yes.
know. So, and again, I think it's sort of like it may be marked down. It's been successful enough so far that there are plans to be a second printing of the book,
Oh, great.
probably in the fall.
Oh,
So
wow.
I'm very pleased about that.
Yeah,
And it only exists in hardcover, but which is true of none of my other books. I mean, that it only exists in hardcover. But I like the way, as an object, the way they sort of like brought it out. So I'm very happy with, everything that Hat and Beard Press has done for me with the book, actually.
great. No, that's great to hear. And you just have had another book come out, which I know you're going to come back to discuss travels in the cities of cinema. Com I'm I this I'm totally going to pronounce this incorrectly. Conversations with, how do you pronounce his name? Isan, is it?
Ehsan Koshbak.
Okay,
And
great.
he's a good friend who I met when he was actually still just living in Iran. Now he's based in London, and
Ah,
he's one of the main programmers of actually the only film festival I go to every year, which is Il Cinema Retrovato in Bologna. It's a festival of film restorations, actually.
oh,
And
wow.
he's been
In the summer, right?
and he's quite remarkable in that he's very much involved with the restorations of major Iranian films.
Ah,
And but he also is a specialist in American cinema.
hmm.
He programs you know, both for Bologna and other festivals like Locarno. He does a lot of programming.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, I'm
And
looking forward to
and
it.
he writes for Sight and Sound. His English is so good, he doesn't have to write in Farsi. He can write in English without, he's quite a brilliant guy. And he used to do jazz podcasts. One of the reasons why he can't go back to Iran is because of doing jazz podcasts, because jazz is sort of frowned on in
Oh,
Iran.
no.
But I mean, or most kinds of music. I mean, so is rock and roll and,
Right.
a lot of other things. But anyway, he was, it's part of a series devoted to book length interviews with film critics.
Right.
The first of the series was on Michel Simon that came out fairly recently. Mine is the second. I don't know which will be the third, but it might be one by an interview with my friend James Nairmore, who's my favorite American academic film critic.
Right.
Uh, and so they're going to be doing a lot more.
Yeah, Joseph McBride told me he's doing one as
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Oh, that's good. So it'll be the same series, I'm sure.
yeah, yeah. I believe I'm pretty sure I'll double check with him, but I'm pretty sure he's because he told me he's doing one, so it must be the same
Yeah,
series.
yeah.
And
And
people,
they've been such a pleasure to work with Sticking Place Books that I have another book coming out with them. It was originally commissioned by an academic press, but we didn't quite see eye to eye on it. And so I switched publishers actually on this one.
when is that one coming out? The
That's
camera.
coming out on May 5th, actually.
Oh, so very soon. Wow,
Yeah, and it's called Camera Movements That Confound Us. And
great.
another short book. I mean, it's, a little over 100 pages, that's all.
Hmm.
Whereas
The
In
links.
Dreams Begin Responsibilities is my longest book. It's 500 pages, actually.
Long to short. But
Yeah.
I'll leave the links in the description box where people can go to order both In Dreams Begin Responsibilities and Travels in the Cities of Cinema. So I know we're gonna have you back in June to talk about Travels in the Cities of Cinema. So I look forward to that. But Jonathan, thanks again for your time today. This was a great treat, and I look forward to having you back.
Thank you. Nice being here.
And thank you
Okay,
all
take
so
care.
much. Thanks for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/RobertBellissimo at the movies for full details. You can also leave a donation, or what I call a tip, by clicking the thanks link, which you will find directly below the video frame. Just click on that and you can leave a donation if you choose to. Of course, I would greatly appreciate that. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so. By pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movie logo, you will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left. In just a second, just click on that. And then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new videos. I would also really appreciate if you leave a comment, share the video, like the video. All of these things create traction onto my YouTube channel and really help share the video far and wide and the channel in general. So thank you so much for doing that, and I will see you all in the next one.